technology, called moteur flottant, floating power. An HCV with a special streamlined body beat the world's distance record by traveling the equivalent of 7 laps around the globe. Its nickname was Petite Rosalie. Able to pay it back only when each line succeeded. In 1934, only 2 years after Rosalie's introduction, Citroën decided essentially to replace it by blending all the technologies he'd pioneered and popularized with a few even more radical ideas.
He had borrowed some ideas from America, from Henry Ford, in terms of production quantities and simplicity, but he also had some very advanced ideas of his own, and his idea was to present in a single car a revolutionary step to the future. And he put all his money on the line and did just that.
André Citroën's revolutionary step was the introduction of a technology practically unknown at the time, front-wheel drive. Up to this point, virtually all cars were pushed along by the rear wheels. Though front-wheel drive offered considerable advantages of traction and stability, the technical obstacles had kept all but a very few car makers from attempting it. And of these, only the American Ford company made more than a few hundred front-drive cars. Even so, Fords like this L29 suffered serious reliability problems, their constant velocity joints failing prematurely due to inadequate lubrication. It was not until 1966 that the Oldsmobile Toronado became the first front-wheel drive car to achieve success in the American marketplace. But in 1933, at least a quarter century ahead of his time, André Citroën wanted a car of completely new design, with no components carried over from earlier vehicles. A costly move that earned the antipathy of his head of design, Maurice Broglie. A talented young engineer named André Lefebvre was instead recruited to head up the project. Lefebvre came to Citroën from Renault, having started out in aviation, a background that would come into play as the car developed. Adding to the project's sizable cost was the necessary demolition and rebuilding of the Quai de Javel factory in just 6 months. The new car was introduced in 1934, descriptively named the Traction Avant, or front drive. The entire development of the Traction 7A had taken just over a year.
When it came out, it combined a number of features, any one of which would have been enough to identify it. Front-wheel drive, of course, torsion bar suspension, 4 independent wheels, 4-wheel hydraulic brakes, an engine with removable linings and push-rod-operated valves, and no running board.
The Traction was the first road car to include a torsion bar suspension, under license from the German auto engineer Ferdinand Porsche. The power-assisted brakes were likewise advanced and likewise licensed from the Lockheed Aircraft Company. None of these features were absolutely new in a production automobile, but it was the first time that they'd been offered together in a single car. Like the Rosalie, the Traction used welded unibody construction, the strength of which Citroën promoted by once again pushing the car off a cliff, and this time driving it away. The styling of the Traction, offered in both sedan and convertible versions, certainly was a giant step forward. Front drive and the absence of a drive shaft permitted designer Flaminio Bertoni to set the Traction quite low to the ground. The aeronautic orientation of Project Chief Lefebvre was evident in the unprecedented attention given to the car's aerodynamics. The Traction's sleek lines and distinctively sloping radiator grille made it look as if it were moving, even when it was standing still. However, because of the Traction Avant's radically shortened development cycle, not everything about the car worked perfectly. The constant velocity joints suffered the same sort of reliability problems that had plagued the Ford. They were replaced by more primitive but dependable universal joints mounted back-to-back. André Citroën had originally planned to include a kind of automatic transmission in the Traction. When the automatic proved unreliable, it was scrapped and replaced by a manual transmission. It was designed on a kitchen table in just 2 weeks.
He just seemed to be able to pick and choose of advanced features and then, amazingly, meld them into a package, because if his suspension had been wrong, if his transmission had been wrong, if his engine had been wrong, the car would have been wrong.
The traction Avant was not wrong. Many in the press and public regarded it as sensational, an engineering masterpiece. This was the car on which André Citroën had bet his company, but it was a bet he was destined to lose. André Citroën had staked everything on the Traction Avant. When it was introduced in 1934, the Traction was the most technologically advanced production car in the world. Sadly, this wasn't enough to save the fortunes of André Citroën and his motor company. The expense of developing the Traction and rebuilding the Quai de Javel factory, along with André Citroën's growing casino debts and the global economic crash of the 1930s, combined to push the company to the brink of bankruptcy. The French government asked Citroën's principal creditor, Michelin Tires, to take control of the company. The price was the layoff of 8,000 workers and the removal of André Citroën as president of the firm bearing his name. In 1935, a claim for his Traction Avant was still ringing in the press, but the Depression had driven sales to their lowest ebb. And André Citroën died of cancer at the age of 57.
Just at the time when the Traction Avant was being recognized as a car that he predicted it would be, unfortunately his gambling caught up with him and he was out of the company and subsequently died, I guess, always with a broken heart in a situation like this. But he didn't get really to see the fruits of his entrepreneurial genius, and those fruits went on to the present day.
The company struggled on under new leadership, fine-tuning the Traction Avant line, introducing new variations. Early versions of the Traction were considered somewhat underpowered, a shortcoming the company soon remedied by introducing the famed 15.6, 15 CV and 6 cylinders. Within a few years of André Citroën's death, sales began to climb. Soon, the Traction Avant was the most popular production car of the day. But the new management was also looking forward to the company's next gamble. The idea came from the new managing director brought in by Michelin, a man named Pierre-Jules Boulanger. He wanted to motorize the whole country, especially the untapped rural market, potential customers who still relied on horse-drawn carts and carriages. Boulanger ordered Citroën engineers to design what he called an umbrella on 4 wheels.
It was a small car, very austere in appearance, very low-powered, geared well enough so that it could run well enough on the roads, and with room for 2 people and a load of potatoes, which is sort of an unusual demographic characteristic to look for.
The top-secret project received the code name TPV, or Très Petite Voiture, very small car. As with the Traction, André Lefebvre headed the project after it had been refused by the chief designer Maurice Broglie. The 1937 prototype TPV had a front end that was corrugated to improve the strength of the light gauge aluminium, and only 1 headlamp, the legal minimum. The 2-cylinder engine could barely get the car up to 40 miles an hour, but it was extremely economical, more than 60 miles to the gallon. There were no frills. Even the windscreen wiper was manually operated. Boulanger also wanted the front-drive TPV to handle comfortably on rough country back roads, and included the specification that a basket of eggs set on the back seat should survive having the car driven across a plowed field with all the eggs unbroken. This the engineers accomplished by including a 4-wheel independent suspension, along with rack and pinion steering and power-assisted brakes. The car was finally ready for production in 1939, and 250 demonstration copies rolled off the line on September the 3rd. The next day, Hitler invaded Poland, and France was at war. World War II and the German occupation of France in 1940 gradually ground Citroën production to a halt. Company managers refused to collaborate with the Nazi conquerors, and by 1943, Citroën factories had been shut down completely. To prevent the TPV from falling into German hands, Pierre Boulanger ordered all but one of the prototypes destroyed. It wasn't until Germany was defeated and the war was over that Citroën restarted production and work began again in earnest on the TPV. Finally, in 1948, after 12 years of design and development, Citroën's very small car was ready to be introduced at the Paris Motor Show under its now official name, the 2 Chevaux, or 2CV.
À Paris, le 35e Salon de l'Automobile a été inauguré par Monsieur Vincent Auriol.
The 2CV, as introduced, was still true to the original design concept with just a few modifications. The corrugated aluminium had been replaced with easier-to-weld sheet steel. The original water-cooled two-cylinder engine had been replaced with an air-cooled design, which was easier to start in winter and cheaper too, if a bit noisy. The 2CV was stunningly inexpensive, at a contemporary price equivalent to £212, about a third the cost of a typical American car. Critical reaction was somewhat mixed. One American journalist asked if it came with a can opener. But the people of France immediately took to the odd little car, and thousands of orders were placed for the 2CV right there at the motor show. By 1950, the back order time ran to 6 years.
It was a tremendous success, and it did put the French farmer on wheels, and it did it economically, and it was a fine little car. And if you really think about it, it's really all anybody needs. I mean, we really don't need the Luxomobiles that we have. But for its time, it was exactly what everybody wanted.
Over the years, the 2CV became a part of the fabric of French life. The car became popular with the younger generation, and Citroën promoted it by staging races, round-the-world tours, rallies such as the Africa Raid. James Bond even drove one in for your eyes only. In later years, Citroën would try to replace the 2CV with cars built on the same mechanics but with greater upmarket appeal. The Ami 6 would have swift, exaggerated lines emphasized by the inclined rear window. The Diane would fit into the product line between the 2CV and the Ami, and would last in production for 23 years. Citroën would also offer the Jeep-like Mehari, an all-terrain four-seat pickup with a ding-resistant plastic body. Each of these vehicles would have its day and its place in the market. But the little 2CV outlived them all. It would even experience a modest revival during the 1970s.
I did get the 2CV at the time at which there was the gas crisis, when there was long lines of people trying to obtain gasoline, and the 2CV was very good about this. It was easy to take it from place to place with very little fuel.
The 2CV lasted in production for more than 41 years. When the last rolled off the line in 1990, more than 3.8 million had been sold worldwide. A return on the company's wager greater than anyone could have imagined. Greater even than the tremendous success of the Traction Avant, which in 1954 was nearing the end of its life and preparing to be replaced by Citroën's most daring breakthrough yet.
Wings of the Red Star.
Important things happened to the Traction 15.6 in the year 1954. For the first time, it was offered in a color other than black, and its name changed to 15.6H for hydropneumatic. The old car now had a new air and oil pressurized rear suspension system. But the changes were not intended to extend the Traction line. In fact, the last Traction Avant rolled off the Quai de Javel production line just 3 years later after 23 years of manufacture and 760,000 sales.